Picture this. You're walking around Blockbuster surrounded by movies. Which one of these makes you stop, pick up the box, read the back, and ultimately rent the movie? Well, friend, that's what capsule art is on Steam. But even the best artists can't create compelling capsule art without your input, your vision, your brief, and your feedback. And on this episode of Freaking Cool Indies, I am joined by James Combridge, an incredibly talented artist with years of experience, and we're diving deep into collaboration and communication.
Let's take a step back and look at the feedback that I'm about to give this person. Are there any opportunities for misinterpretation?
Turning your vision into a standout Steam capsule art that converts.
You can't just come back and say, I don't like that, it's not working for me.
We'll show you how to create briefs that clearly communicate your game's unique appeal, how to give and receive feedback that actually improves the capsule art, and how to avoid common miscommunications that waste time and, more importantly, waste money.
There's a lesson there for devs and artists.
So get ready to transform your capsule art from meh to must play and attract the players that your game deserves. Welcome to Freaking Cool Indies. All right, James, welcome to Freaking Cool Indies. Today, we are talking about everyone's favorite topic, and that is capsule art. But more specifically, how to level up your capsule art and clearly communicate your vision to the artist. Both, obviously, we want you to be standing out with your capsule art, but at the same time, also blending in depending on the genre that you are in. So no matter if you are an artist, an indie dev looking to hire one, or if you want to just tackle capsule art creation yourself, there is going to be a ton of value in this episode. So with that, James, welcome to the podcast, my friend.
Thanks very much. Good to be here.
Oh, great to have you. So I want to start off, James, by setting the scene. And obviously, we're going to be talking capsule art in this episode, but I want to just make sure that we are all on the same page with things and setting the stage. So can we quickly break down, when we say capsule art, what do we mean? Or what are we kind of going to be talking about from that perspective? Is it just the one singular thumbnail, or is there more to that?
So how I understand it is it's kind of like everything that's front facing on a Steam page. So it'd be the illustration and the logo, all the little banners that pop up. It's kind of like the splash page for the game that you've got up on Steam.
And I guess beyond looking nice, like why is capsule art such a critical part of a game's success?
It's like the book cover or the movie poster or the elevator pitch, right? It's like everything that the user first interacts with that sells them on a product, basically, or in the YouTube sphere, it'd be like the equivalent of the title and thumbnail, the thing that gets the user to click. So you can think about it very much like in that sense. So you'll sort of want to be treating it in the same way that a YouTube creator might treat those things, thinking about how can I sell my product to my target audience? How can I get them to click on my game? How can I clearly communicate what my game is so that when they click on it, I'm then going to deliver on that promise, all those kind of things.
Starting from the beginning, let's say I'm a developer and I decide, you know what, I think I'm ready to hire someone to help me with my capsule art. Before anything, before going out, before finding an artist, what is just the single most important thing a developer should prepare before reaching out to an artist?
I think the best thing is a comprehensive brief, and to sort of unpack that a little bit more, it should be kind of like a complete package of explaining to another person what your game is, about its style, its story, if the story is relevant, about the gameplay, about the style of game, like the feeling that they want to elicit from the player. Also key things about like maybe some of the technical aspects as well. We can dive into a little more of that if you want to with some examples, but I think sort of like a complete picture of what the game is and then what they want out of a piece of capsule art, with a lot of explanation and visual reference material to really help explain to an artist, hey, this is exactly what I want to create.
Cool. So, and would that typically be given to you with just writing, or are you asking for, hey, can you send me over a prototype or a demo, or kind of how is it best delivered to you?
I think it's a pretty safe rule to say as much information as possible is always going to be useful, like as much context as possible. So in short, all of the above, but yes, if there's like a gameplay demo, it really helps to be able to share that so the artist can understand what it is that they're actually making the artwork for. But in addition to that, yes, very clear written explanations of what they need, maybe even a video call conversation to talk about it, and really clear references for logos that they like, other games that they like, other Steam capsule artworks that they like, sort of like a story overview to provide context for the artwork, some references for the artwork content, like what they actually want to have in the artwork. So yeah, descriptions and accompanied by visual examples as often as possible. You know, artists are visual communicators, and so the written accompanied by the visual is going to be super helpful. And then also like really clearly defining the deliverables, like, you know, taking all of that into context. Here's what I need from you. Here are the final deliverables. So I need a logo. I need a background. I need it to be broken down in this manner so that I can easily sort of disseminate the assets if I want to do website promos or whatever it is, making sure all of that stuff is clearly defined so that an artist can look at that. And it's basically like an instruction manual. They can look at that and say, okay, I think I know what we're going to build. You know, obviously during the process, there's a whole lot of other back and forth in terms of communication that actually needs to happen to arrive at what the final is going to be. But having a brief that defines clearly as much as possible is a really great starting point.
Very cool. And is there any particular tools that you would recommend for a developer to, like, would you just toss kind of a bunch of pictures in a Google Doc, or is there anything
Absolutely.
that you like using or you like to recommend?
Personally, I like using Notion, but you could just as easily use Google Docs to throw something together, so long as you were including that information, basically. The format, you know, doesn't matter too much as long as you're including the key information, including the written and the visual.
And I also just want to call out, this isn't as much a question for you, but I just want to give a shout out to Kevin. He actually has a YouTube channel called Indie Dev Labs, and he created a really great tool called Steam Poacher. And basically what you can do is you can toss in any Steam URL and it will give you every piece of capsule art about that game. So the banners, the main logos, the bigger ones, small ones, and you can go ahead, use that for your inspiration. And then he just added a brand new feature where you can click one button and just download them all. So I think going back to creating that inspiration board or that brief for an artist, it's a fantastic tool.
Yeah, for sure. And there are other really useful templates out there as well. I think templates could potentially be really useful. Like when I was first approached to do capsule artwork, I went looking for them as well, just to make sure I had everything I need laid out. So if you're a dev and you're approaching an artist, it might not be their first one. So having a template where it's kind of got all the assets laid out in whatever it is, like the Photoshop file, or even if it's just a list of here's everything that I need to create, can be super helpful.
When you're actually creating it, or maybe not when you're creating it, but when a developer is thinking about their capsule art and kind of how to best describe it, like how important is it for the art to match the in-game visuals, or should the artist and dev be more so thinking about the general theme of it all?
I think probably general feel. Often the gameplay and the visuals matching is pretty common, especially for like smaller indie productions, just as a cost-saving measure. Like, oh, I've already got all these assets, I might as well use them and arrange them in a really pleasing manner. So that's definitely, like, if you're on a budget, that's a cost-effective approach. But by the same token, like, it could be, you know, a much more polished sort of blue sky interpretation of what they see the feeling of the game being as well. And I think, you know, unless you're really utilizing those assets in a really clever way, you know, that other end of the spectrum of like making like a really inspiring kind of image that's sparks the curiosity of someone who's browsing on Steam. Either of those can be like just as valid an option. I think it depends on the audience to some extent. Like, I know there's a lot of casual players where, you know, depending on the game's art style, they might really like to see, you know, like a low poly style capsule that really, it's like a snapshot of the gameplay, you know. Some people click for that reason and other people click for different reasons. So it really depends a little bit on who you're targeting, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. And I know you have a brief that you would like to walk us through, and I think that's going to be really, really helpful. But just, I guess, one final question for you: how much of the overall vision of a capsule art comes down to the artist, and kind of how much should the dev be providing, in the sense of, like, is it up to the dev to have kind of all the answers, or when you're working with a client, is typically it's like, okay, this is what I got, and like, let me take this back and workshop it.
I think both can be true. So there would be some devs where maybe they've got an alpha build of a game that's, mostly placeholder assets, and they have like a rough idea in mind of, this is what I want it to look like. And so they might, in the early stages, commission an artist to do a splash capsule type thing where the artist is exploring a bunch of those things, like, what could this world look like? And it kind of doubles in a way as blue sky concept art, where the dev can look at what they've done and then build the game to sort of match that aesthetic. But the opposite can be true as well, where they have something established, they have really clear inspirations for what they want the style to look like, and all of that information can just be included in the brief, especially if the game isn't visually matching that standard yet. They know that's where they want it to be, so they include all the information. So it can really be a spectrum, as long as it's clearly defined, basically.
All right, James, would it be possible for you to share your screen and we can dive into actually going through one of the briefs?
Sure. Now, let me just share my screen. So it's kind of, let's treat this as just like a general framework, but this is just an example of things that as an artist, I wouldn't mind seeing if I was to get a brief. So basically seeing an introduction and a game overview. This is a great place for devs to put in like their elevator pitch version, a story summary, if any, and then we get down. This is just background information. If you have like a gallery, or if you want to include a game demo for them to use, that's good as like an accompanying piece of reference. And then in terms of like the nitty gritty of the Steam capsule brief itself, same thing again, just like a brief overview of what needs to be created. And I can share this as well. We don't need to dive too deep into the examples, but I have built this out as like a template that I can share with you at the end if people would find that useful. And then sort of including references. So I've got 3 here to start with, but there might be more depending on the game and the capsule art that you're commissioning. Written summaries of game style with a bunch of references pasted underneath so that you can talk about things in the styles that you like. You could even break that down. Like I might bring up another example here for a brief that I received. Yeah, so here's a great example of a brief that I received. Like this is a supporting documentation basically. And it was a few examples of capsule artworks where they sort of liked the style, they liked the mood. And then there's more specific examples of what specifically from each reference they actually really liked. So breaking it down, for the logo itself, like let's explore something that looks like this. Here are some things that I like about these logos. Here's what else to include. Again, clearly defining deliverables, like different capsule sizes. So yeah, that I found really useful. And we can get into some good feedback examples as well. So there could be more things that you want to include in here, like, oh, hey, maybe there's a character in this capsule artwork. Here are some references for characters that I really like. Those are all super useful. And then, yeah, the sort of boring stuff, but super important stuff, defining what the final deliverables are going to be and what the technical requirements are. So that's it. Like, it's pretty simple, but it's kind of like a framework to get you started, to start including as much as you possibly can.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic, like the template itself, even just looking at it, breaking down into one quick and easy page, I could see making both the artist and the developer's life much easier. Just having the developer spend a little bit of time filling this out, doing some research, and I think coming to the table with a very clear understanding of what exactly that they're looking for.
Yeah, and it definitely shouldn't be treated as like, I put together this brief and now I have everything I need. Like, the next step is showing that to the artist, communicating with the artist, and having that preliminary conversation to start making sure that they understand the brief, but they'll probably come back to you with questions that you didn't consider. And then you can sort of define it a little bit more. That often is the case. So it definitely shouldn't be treated as like, here it is, now go. Not necessarily.
You just send that in an email. Yeah, and just like, okay, here you are. I'll see you in 2 weeks.
You don't know what you don't know. And if an artist has questions, they'll let you know pretty quick. What things are ambiguous to them, or hopefully.
Is there any other kind of like either most common mistakes or other things when it comes to briefing with an artist that you want to just call out and maybe help other people understand that, like, hey, this is not great, or you shouldn't be doing this?
I won't say providing a poorly written brief or one that's not super comprehensive obviously isn't good. I won't say it's necessarily a no-no, but I think what I should add on to and what I was just talking about with the template is, and I might add this in to the template that I send over, and that is triple checking your deliverables to make sure what it is that you're actually commissioning in terms of the final is clearly defined, but also I think it can be super helpful to define the process. So outline how the work is actually going to take place. So a very sort of standard process in a lot of creative fields is the research phase, like research and references, which ideally the dev is doing, and packaging that up into a brief. Handing that over, having that initial discussion and making sure everyone is on the same page. And then it'll go through a series of steps, and ideally it will look something like exploration sketches around a feedback where the dev can look at the explorations and go, I like this, this, and this. Let's do another round. And the second phase would be iterations. So making another set of variations based on that feedback, handing that back to the dev. And then ideally at this point, there would have been enough explorations and iterations to where the artist and the dev can say, okay, this is the direction. Now let's go and we'll start implementing the final. You want sort of like a third of the way through work in progress update where the artist has taken that established direction and sort of blocked it out in a much more defined manner, but it's still loose enough, it's still early enough on in the process to where any major tweaks can happen if they need to. Then there'll be sort of a later, I'd say like pre-final update where they say, hey, here's all the changes. Here's a bit more polish so that it's much closer to the final, but I haven't added too much polish yet. And that gives the dev another opportunity to add some slightly smaller feedback. Maybe something's come up in the process where, now that I see it in color, can you change the color of that? Can you change the positioning of that because of these reasons? And then at that point, the last deliverable will be, okay, here's the final. Again, another round of final, very small tweaks. If the process so far has been ran in a manner where things are being caught early on, ideally, there won't be any major changes at this stage. That's kind of why you run through the process. And then, once those tweaks are made and everyone's happy, it's sign off, final packaging up, final delivery. So back to what I think is really useful to include is just outlining that dot point process of here's how I would like it to look. And I think following a structure that is pretty similar to that would be my recommendation, because the last thing you want is, for an artist to go gung-ho and they're already up to like, I'm 3/4 of the way finished. And the dev's going, well, I don't really like that. Or, that's not working for these reasons. Can you spend, but the artist at this point, is going to be frustrated, like, I didn't know, or like, I've used up all my time budget on this and you're not even going to use it. So that's the reason for a process like that. So I think clearly defining that, for devs who don't know the creative process, like now and sometimes even artists having that clearly defined because they might not know, or, they might want to be gung-ho and, jump in and go further than they need to at the start.
Absolutely. And I feel like anyone who's ever worked in either agency world or client or freelancing world, I'm sure you've come across many situations where it's like, everything looks great, sign off, and then you get to like a further stage and they're like, hold on a second, can we go back 3 steps and just change that, please? And you're just like, come on, please.
Yeah. Well, my advice to artists in those cases is like, save versions. Like, as many feedback rounds as you go through, save versions. If you're making a change, save a new version, work as non-destructively as possible. I'm a sucker for non-destructive workflows where everything's kind of separated. Maybe that's like a little bit of client trauma there. Like, I have to keep everything separate in case anything changes. But now my Photoshop file is a nightmare to wade through. But yeah, that is what it is. The versions is a really good catch-all for that.
Yeah, that's a great tip. And I guess from a revision standpoint, is that something, and again, I don't know if you can talk about either how you typically do it or just like other artists and things that but is that typically something that is laid out during the contract phase of this, where it's like you will get 2 revisions, 3 revisions, or is it typically kind of like we'll make revisions until you're happy?
I think it's good. I think it's good to have those defined. And I guess like defining the process is good for that as well, because it makes it really clear what the expectations are. And you can think about it like it's insurance for both parties. Like it's insurance for the dev to say, well, you agreed that, reasonable amount of revision was okay. And it's insurance for the artist. If the dev, suddenly says at the end, oh, it'd be great to have like 5 characters in the foreground. Like, can we do that? And I think like, you work with a lot of artists, especially up-and-coming artists who might feel pressured to say yes, but then, might get the result that you're asking for. But I think it doesn't bode well for if they, let's say, not great at holding their boundaries for themselves. It does tend to lead to a little bit of resentment, and that can affect, the relationship. It can lead to drama. It can also lead to, maybe they start doing a rush job or a half-assed job because they feel pressured to do something. So it's generally, and that it does work both ways, but generally it's better to really have a lot of those conversations early on before any work gets started, just to make sure you're on the same page. Yeah.
I feel like it's very akin to a relationship. In any
totally.
like a relationship, you
Totally.
want to make sure that you're both on the same page, and that, not to say that you have to look out for each other's best interests in a way, because this, at the end of the day, it's a partnership, right?
Yeah, and anyone in a relationship will know that even though you've known each other for years, every day is rife with opportunities for miscommunication. So,
1,000%.
Working professionally should be treated with just as much vigor.
my poor wife knows all about that shit having to deal with me. I'm joking.
Yeah.
So I think this has been fantastic so far, but let's talk from more of like a hiring perspective. So as maybe a new dev to the scene and not really knowing, do you have any tips about hiring an artist, kind of, or what you would do if you were a developer, and kind of finding red flags, or just making sure that you're finding someone who matches your style?
I think if I was a dev, so there's a few things. Often if you're an indie dev starting out, budget is a big concern. So you want to balance what you want from a capsule artwork with what you can afford. So I would say it's probably really about finding artists where you can see that they're sort of at that point in their career where I could still afford you, but I can see that you have some skill. Also, probably depending on what you're looking for these days, I will word this carefully because it relates to AI, but like a lot of indie devs, I think that's probably a viable option. They do need to treat using AI art as an option with caution, potentially because of sentiment. I think a lot of gamers probably feel like, if your front-facing image is an AI-generated one, I can't be sure if my finger's like 100% on the pulse with this, but I do feel like people get this impression that it's somehow cheap in a sense, or it feels like disingenuous. I don't know if I'm right about that. I could be wrong about that, but take that as you will.
I think you're tracking. I think you're tracking in the right direction. I for sure feel that same sentiment, especially from the indie dev community. Or maybe just let's call it the dev community.
Yeah.
I for sure feel that sentiment regarding
I think
AI.
It calls up feelings of, like, we all know the slew of projects that are sort of like pump and dump, buy my game, look how shiny it is, I just want to make money off you. And I think that association is what's happening. So take that as you will, use it with caution. If you have even just a little bit of Photoshop skills to where you can use something like that tastefully, by all means do that at your own discretion. But in terms of artists, like, I would probably view artists that include AI in their portfolios as a red flag as well, for the same reasons, because they're putting it in their portfolio. A portfolio is supposed to be something that showcases your ability. So you're pretending that you can do this when you can't. Or maybe you can, but you're still giving off the impression that it's about the being disingenuous again. They're saying, oh, I can do this, but they didn't actually do it. So yeah, that's one thing. But in terms of finding those artists in that kind of up-and-coming sweet spot, to be honest, it's like a world that I'm less familiar with, having not needed to look for artists in that particular position. But I would say probably joining like a bunch of different communities, like game art communities, developer communities, wherever that may be, like Discord. You might find, I'm not sure what certain work sites like Upwork and things like that, those might be fruitful. Like, there are artists that specialize in Steam capsule artwork for indie devs. So places like that could be useful to look. Yeah, I think that's my off the cuff thoughts about it, I reckon.
Very nice. Yeah, again, they have, obviously there's things Upwork, Fiverr is another big one, and then I'm sure on Reddit there's a ton of different communities for game artists, and you can kind of go around and find people who match a particular style that interests you. Otherwise, I do think that YouTube is also a phenomenal place to find it. That's where I found you, James. And I was doing research for this topic, this episode, and I found your channel, and more specifically your video. It's called From Sketch to Final, and I will post it in the description. It is phenomenal. Like, it is for, especially if we're talking if we're talking capsule art, you take the viewers behind the scenes from your entire process, start to finish, and again, just the amount of value. I think it is one of the most underrated channels that I've actually come across on YouTube.
Thank you.
I think it's really a great way for people to be able to find artists.
There's a lesson there for devs and artists to put stuff out there as well, because you never know whose lap it's going to land in. Yeah, so great way for either party to get their name out there and get people in touch with them.
Yeah, 1,000%. And maybe one last thing from an artist perspective, and before we jump into feedback, but I think if you are an artist looking for work as well, and you're kind of on Steam and you see something that you think you could make better, I also think there might be something to reaching out to the developer and, providing that feedback or providing that context of, hey, I checked out your game, it looked great. Like, here's maybe 2 or 3 tweaks that I might make to kind of make your thing pop a little bit more. And again, I think it's a great way for an artist to potentially find some additional clients and maybe work backwards. So
yeah, another note on that for artists, it's like, you get hired for the work that you publish, for the work that's in your portfolio. So if you want to be entering in a certain kind of field, like, work on that stuff and put it out there, in addition to reaching out to people. But if people can't see what you can do, why are they going to hire you for it?
1,000%. All right, my friend, let's jump into everyone's favorite topic, and that is providing and receiving feedback. Those awkward conversations of, okay, I've hired you, I've tossed you over my brief, we've discussed, and we get revision 1 back, and now it is time to provide you my thoughts, my questions, and my concerns. So as a artist, what is the worst kind of feedback that a developer can give you?
I think unconstructive feedback. So unpacking that a little bit, you can't just come back and say, I don't like that, it's not working for me. Or something vague like, hey, make it cooler. It helps to be really specific. So the same thoughts that I was giving on providing a good brief also apply to feedback. So being specific about what's not working for you, trying to use much more objective terms as well, I think helps. Like, hey, this is not working for me for these reasons. Is it possible to try X, Y, or Z, instead of just saying, hey, this is looking uninspiring, and can you make it feel, more inspiring? Like, A, that's vague. B, that kind of language also carries with it like more emotional connotations. It's less objective. It's less emotionally neutral, shall we say. Everyone has a different communication style, but I think when you're collaborating, it helps to communicate in a much more objective style and in a manner in which it feels more like a collaboration, I would say. So being specific and including visual examples with everything that you're saying. So same thing as the brief. As often as you can, or wherever it's relevant. So even if it's taking a screenshot of the artwork that the artist sent you and saying, hey, this is not working for me, can you move that over there? Obviously, replace those words with the actual subject matter, providing, like a big fat red arrow pointing to the thing that you're talking about. And another big fat red arrow saying, like, move it here in this circle. You'd be surprised how useful that is and how often not having those things leads to a misinterpretation, especially when you're working with, there could be any number of disconnects between the artist and developer. Like, they might not have shared vernacular. Like, artists have artist speak and developers have developer speak. And so a dev might say something and it makes sense to them in their context, but an artist, it might mean something else. So that visual example is adding that additional context. There could also be, if you're working with someone anywhere else in the world, there's going to be cultural differences as well. So the same rule applies. And for the same reason, like, provide as much context as you possibly can. And trying to keep it clear and understandable and neutral. I guess speaking more to like language barriers as well, and even like dev artist background barriers, a note on that is don't dumb it down, but try to speak in as simple terms as you can and try and condense what you're trying to say into sort of like a short, simpler package. And the visual examples really help with that, because you don't have to spend a paragraph describing exactly what you mean when you could just be like, circle this, cut that off, move it there, and they can see it. And it's like, oh, yeah, I get that, because I can see it.
Is there any particular tools or structure that you recommend with that? Like if when you provide back a first draft of, hey, here's what I'm thinking, or this is kind of the rough sketches so far, or kind of the V1, would those just be image files, and then a developer can throw that into whatever, a Canva or a Microsoft Paint even, and just kind of mark it up that way? Or is there something that you like using?
Not particularly, as long as it's easy to understand. Like for artists out there, save all the iterations just in a single JPEG. It's a small file size and everything is all there. You don't have to open multiple things to give feedback. And then for people giving feedback, chuck it in whatever's comfortable for you, as long as you can easily make notes and point to things. Canva or Figma are great tools for that, or even just chucking it in a Google Doc. Whatever works for you. But having it all in, again, packaged up in one file that's easy for the artist to open would definitely be the go.
I'm also, and I would love to get your thoughts if I'm on the money with this, but something that I typically do in just like my 9 to 5 when I'm working with clients is using even something like a Loom, or just kind of recording a screen share and talking over my thoughts. And hey, I would love to change this and maybe move this here. Here's a picture that I found that I like it more, but it at least gives you that asynchronous kind of updating, and then as an artist you can go back and kind of rewatch that video as well. So that's also something for the listeners that might be helpful as well.
Yeah, totally. Like everyone has a different communication style, but for those that are comfortable doing that asynchronous like recording, it can be really helpful, because again, it's just another layer of context. Sometimes people have a much easier way of communicating how they're feeling about something. But use with caution if you're the kind of person that puts their foot in it too often, And for the artists as well, like giving and receiving feedback is an art, for both parties. So I think regardless of like if you're a dev or an artist, try to remember in your communications that everyone is just trying to get from A to B and just trying to solve a problem. So you'll always deal with people who may be feeling a certain way, or maybe they're not, but they just have a certain communication style. It's important to try and distance yourself from the emotional side of it and just try to be as objective as possible, and just try and realize that even if a certain piece of feedback from a dev or an artist comes off as, let's say, combative, try and remember that underneath that, they're trying to communicate their needs on either side. So it's really about trying to meet them at that level and trying to address the needs themselves. Otherwise things start getting a bit confusing, and you can get down into the weeds, and it becomes sort of a more adversarial interaction as opposed to a collaborative one. So yeah, I've had times where, I'll receive a piece of feedback, and like all artists will know this, and they'll be like, screw you, man. Like, how dare you? Or like, oh God, like, that's what I did, or that's what you asked for. That's the beauty of asynchronous communication, is you can let off a bit of steam and then calm yourself down and think to yourself, okay, what is it that you're actually trying to say? How can I actually address your concerns? Yeah. Anyway, that's a little side tangent, but a bit of fun to include.
It's perfect. It is perfect. And James, did you say that you had actually some feedback, like a feedback brief or something that you can share as well?
Yeah. So speaking about visual examples, let's provide a visual example. So pretty much what I was talking about, like clear, this is the same piece as the YouTube one, but this is, sort of behind the scenes. But this is what I mean, like very clear, like, I prefer number 1 from number 2. We've got an arrow pointing to what it is that they're actually talking about. Just clear dot point communication, pointing to stuff, so there's no ambiguity about what's being talked about.
It seems like a very great client that you had there.
She was great. Yeah. No complaints there. She sort of nailed it out of the gate. Obviously someone very well versed in clear communication.
And this is maybe in the realm of feedback, but can we talk about just creative control? And again, I think that's also one of those struggles that come into play when it's like, I as a developer maybe have, I can see it in my head and I'm trying to communicate, and the artist is saying something else in their head. But like, how much creative control should a dev try to have just kind of in this process? Maybe what are some of the risks of micromanaging or being a little bit too involved in like the artist's process?
I don't know if there's a hard black and white answer on like to what degree either party should have creative control. At the end of the day, it's a collaboration, and the dev has approached the artist because of what they can do. So in that sense, like, they have creative contribution. In terms of the content itself and like representing the game, the dev will definitely have the right to sort of define the terms, shall we say. Obviously if someone commissions something in a playful style and the artist comes back in a style that doesn't match what's been defined in the brief, that's sort of like a very clear thing that they can point to and say, hey, the style's not working for me. Can we make it more like this? And I think in terms of creative control, often you'll hire an artist that has developed their artistic fundamentals to a point where they're making decisions for certain reasons. And you might have some feedback where, let's say you need a layout change, and you say, can we shift this? I think it's really helpful to avoid those kind of creative clashes, to qualify what you're asking for with an explanation, in a sense. Like, hey, can we move this here? Because later on, I would like a lot of blank space on this canvas to really not distract from the logo. That's very different to saying, hey, this is great, but move that, It avoids those cases where the artist might be like confused and be like, but that messes up the composition. Maybe they're not thinking about the fact, like maybe they're not considering those other factors. And it works both ways as well. Like, I guess good advice for artists is if you have any additions or, that weren't asked for, but that you put in anyway, it really helps to explain your reasoning. behind it so that the dev can understand where you're coming from. Also, if you have any pushback, like the dev wants to say, put a cloud behind that thing there, and you can explain to them your concerns. If you disagree, you can say, well, hey, I don't think so because that's going to mess up this aspect of the composition, or, that's not going to frame things in the same way. And then, maybe they can leave it up to the dev to say yes or no. But just having that open communication about here's why I'm asking for any given thing, I think like brings it more into that collaborating as a team mindset instead of like an adversarial one, where you're both essentially trying to solve the same problem. Is like, how can I make this good? How can the composition be good? So, yeah.
As we're kind of approaching the end of this interview, is there any other tips or anything that you feel that we might not have touched upon that you wanted to talk about? Yeah, just any final tips that either to the developers or to an artist about just how to make this whole feedback process smoother, more productive, and any other areas that we might not have touched upon on this call.
I don't think so, but maybe a good way to summarize would be communicate a lot and communicate often. Especially at the start of the process, communicate a lot and often, because that's where a lot of the problem solving and opportunities for miscommunication are best solved, because you haven't invested a bunch of time yet. So a massive part of the process is the communication. And so getting that out of the way early on as much as possible, even if it takes 3 different rounds of an artist saying to a developer, let me explain to you what I think you're asking for so that you can tell me if I've fully understood it or not, or would you like to add anything else? Yeah, and even then, things get missed. So following that kind of structured process really helps with that.
Yeah, no, and again, that's perfect. I know with communication, there's so many different ways. There's so many amazing books and podcasts that are out there about, let's call it more general communication, but even just things like repeating back with what the person has said, but just in, like you alluded to make sure that you are both aligned, because even oftentimes people can say the same thing, but still misinterpret what the other person is saying. So not especially at the beginning, and not feeling like, oh, you know what, I don't want to be a burden because I've already asked for 2 edits in this first stage, I'm just gonna like let them move forward. And then again, down the line, that's when you're starting to get into problems because you did stay quiet, right?
Yeah.
Again, it's communication is a very, very difficult thing. I personally hate the term soft skills. I know communication typically falls under the soft skill category.
Yeah.
I think soft skills is a horrible name for it because it is incredibly hard. I typically will refer to them as power skills because
totally.
Again, it is not easy.
Yeah.
No. And it's something that we all do, but it's not something that I think a lot of people cognitively train. Right. And it's not, I think people don't often spend enough time to take the step back and think about, how am I communicating, or am I listening, or am I hearing with what this person is saying? And there's just so many elements to it. Right. And again, some days people have bad days and it's like, I just don't care what you're saying. I'm not going to take any of it in. So it's communication can be hard.
Yeah. You mentioned training there as well. Like that might be like somewhat of an opportunity to train those skills, might be finding those communities where there are devs and artists who are, you might want to initiate a collaboration and say, hey, like, I want to practice, I'm making a game. I need this for any artist that wants experience, like working with a client, let's collaborate and practice together to develop those communication skills. It's kind of like a safe place to do that outside of the pressure of like a commissioned work, for example. So, if you're an up-and-coming artist or a new dev that feels a little bit intimidated by that, exploring that avenue of practice might be something you would want to do.
And it's also very important from even just a client in a relationship building perspective as well, right? If you're an artist and you really take pride on how you communicate, and if you're a dev who takes pride in how they communicate, like going down the line as you work with more artists or you work with more devs, it's like you're more likely for people to refer you or introduce you to different people in their network because of it. So I do think that it's part of the overall like packaging of yourself that is very big in the especially in the business side of game creation.
Totally. And it can, I've had cases where, I've been midway through a project and I've had to step away for certain reasons, or I've said no to certain projects. But it's all down to like how I said no, how I exited. I made sure that they had everything they needed and that everything was clearly communicated and packaged up in a way that I could step out and they could hand it off really easily. So even in cases where, life happens and things might not work out, you can still say no in such a way that the person would be like, oh, that was really nice. Like, I might remember them, or, I might remember them when I'm talking to, my friend who just happens to need something. So you never know. Even in the times where things don't necessarily go as smoothly, definitely like how you communicate with other people is, like you say, it's like you're selling like your package as an individual, not just as a artist or a dev.
1,000%, 1,000%. Well, with that, James, can you let the people know? So for anyone who's listening, maybe if someone wants to follow you, to hire you, to work with you, where would be the best place that people can find you?
So you can find my work on ArtStation or YouTube. Just look up James Combridge. It's like Cambridge with an O. I'm lucky enough that no one else in the world has my name, so I'll be the first thing that comes up anywhere you look. But yeah, hit me up on YouTube or ArtStation. That's probably like the places that I frequent the most.
Amazing. And obviously links will be below in the video here. And once again, I know I spoke about it before, but James's YouTube channel is incredibly underrated. It is the most soothing. It's basically like lo-fi music, but for artists. Just watching you go through your processes of how you create this art, and especially from someone who is like, I feel like I am artistic, but like I can't draw worth for shit. And when I watch you, I watch the other one that you did with all of the snow techniques on the mountains, and it's just, I just sit there watching it. It's like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen in my life. Like, you are so incredibly talented. So again, I highly recommend, whether you're an artist, whether you're a developer, whatever it is, just go check out James's YouTube channel, because it is phenomenal. Lastly, so I like to do this with all of my guests here on Freaking Cool Indies. I really do truly believe that paying it forward is very incredible, and there are so many amazing developers out there, but obviously in the world of attention economy, it's hard to be noticed sometimes. So I just wanted to ask you if there is any projects or any developers that really capture your eye and someone that you wanted to shout out within the gaming sphere.
Yeah, for sure. There's two that come to mind. One of them is the client that I gave examples of. Obviously, I have to give them a shout out because it was such a joy working with them. So go and check out their game, LGEMTD, and you can provide a link for that. The other one, that's a solo dev that I have sunk so much time into playing the pre-release. I'm not sure where it's at now, but it's in beta, is a indie game called Crab Champions. It's like a roguelite where you run around as a crab. It's got lots of like fun weapon mechanics. And I spend way too much time at the end of my workday, just sort of unwinding with that. Yeah, super fun. Had to give them a shout out.
It looks like it's still in early access. They got over 21,000 reviews, overwhelmingly positive. That's awesome. Well, James, once again, thank you again, my friend. I do truly appreciate you spending time to come on and talk to us about this incredibly important topic. And again, I'll leave all the links in below for what we talked about today, for James's template regarding how to create a great brief. And I guess with that, James, you have officially been dubbed a freaking cool indie. I got to get like a little gavel, or I don't know, I got to somehow make it official. But
thanks very
you,
much.
My friend, are a freaking cool indie.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate it. This was fun.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And to everyone listening, thank you again. Have a great day. Have a great night. And we'll see you soon.